Hi, I'm Harry Rock, and welcome to another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents. This is a special collaborative effort with Mike Squindo, Executive Director of the Westfield Senior Center, Tina Gorman, COA Special Projects Coordinator, and Pete Coles, producer of WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Our topic today is understanding the grief journey and basically surviving the holidays while grieving. My guest is David Arfa, who is the coordinator of bereavement services for Bay State Hospice, and they are located at 30 Capitol Drive in West Springfield. We're going to be discussing the common misunderstandings about grief and how it affects us during the holidays. So, David, welcome to the show. I am actually really excited about this show. It's a topic that affects a lot of people. And it's definitely around I was just talking to somebody about it this morning. And when the holidays come, memories are very fresh. It may be the first anniversary of coming through a major holiday without a loved one. There's a lot to this topic, and so I'm looking forward to sort of trying to unwrap this thing and see if we can get our heads understanding it so that we can better deal with these kinds of issues going forward. So before we get into the topic, I just want to say welcome, and can you give us a little bit of a rundown on your role exactly, what you do in your building, in your office, in your profession?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. You're absolutely right, not only in the first year after death, but even after 10 years or 20 years. The holidays can be this time where we just remember our loved ones, and they're part of our lives. And they continue to be part of our lives. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, we're thrilled to have you here. So can you just talk a little bit about the purpose, the mission, the role of Bay State Hospice?
Yeah.
Because that's who you're a part of that organization.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
So my role is as the bereavement coordinator. I'm a grief counselor, grief educator, with Bay State Hospice.
Okay.
Bay State Hospice is here to support families, giving them control through comfort and dignity at the end of life when they've have a life-limiting illness, and they've decided it's time to move from curative care to comfort care. And that we do that with our team of nurses and doctors that have expertise in managing symptoms. And also, we're there for the whole family as well. We provide not only the nurses, we have aides and volunteers to sit with the patient and be with the families. We can provide respite care for caregivers as well for a couple days or a week, when it's, because that is such a tremendous nonstop burden. And we also have social workers available that can help with everything from family medical leave paperwork to funeral planning to whatever concerns they carry, to financial supports in the community that are available, veterans information, kind of being that go-between, as well as just the emotional support. They're there to be with the family, to always ask, how's it going? How's it been this week? Having this network of people come into the family as a support. We also have spiritual care staff that are there for end-of-life care. And our chaplains, our spiritual care staff, like at the hospital, they're not here to bring religion to anybody, but they're to support people of whatever's meaningful for them, through finding out about who they are, what their values are.
Yeah.
And providing life review, being able to talk if there's any long-standing guilt or resentments or anger that's festering in someone's life.
Interesting, right.
Having someone just to share that with, to facilitate family meetings, to provide all that. Right?
Forget...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We forget sometimes that, we're thinking of the patient as the primary focus, but you've got to remember it's their surrounding families.
Whole family.
Incredibly affected and need support as well.
Yes, and sometimes it's friends, and some people are alone as well. And so hospice provides all this whole network of support to allowing people to really, again, bring comfort into their lives and the dignity to during this time. Yeah,
And
very much.
is Bay State Hospice part of the entire Bay State health system?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're in the community. We're also in the hospital as well. We are part of Bay State Health.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it about 3.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I learned my role about 10 years ago. I retrained as a interfaith hospital chaplain. And actually at Bay State has a tremendous clinical pastoral education program.
Oh, wow.
So they not only provide spiritual care staff, but they train them as well at Bay State. And that's where I learned. I went through 4 units of clinical pastoral education, different settings. And then I worked in community hospitals. I worked at Bay State, at Providence Behavioral Health for several years, and at Mercy as well. And it was there learning, going into hospital rooms, that we all live with loss.
Yeah.
And loss is more than even the death of a loved one.
Right.
Loss is also as we receive a diagnosis of how our life is going to be changed. Loss is about the imagined futures that we had that can evaporate overnight. Providence Behavioral Health is half psychiatric units and half addiction treatment services. And that's really where we began doing grief support groups.
Oh, wow.
Because we all live with loss. It's so human.
Right.
No one no one is not touched by loss.
Yeah, right.
Who is alive today.
That's a great point.
It's and yet it's we don't talk about it very much.
Right.
So that comes to my job of being able to support people and have conversations about the impact of death, of grief and loss in our lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into this a little deeper. Can you define grief? Just what is grief exactly, so that people kind of have a context of where we're going with the conversation.
Yes, you bet. I like you took a stab at it in our conversations that I thought was very good. Our responses to loss. And grief, I call grief, it's a landscape of feelings. It's not just our sadness. It's the whole spectrum of feelings that we have. It could be anxieties, fears, numbness, anger, relief. It can all be part of our grief journey. And I like the title. I saw the title here that, about being with our grief journey, because it's not an on-off switch.
Right.
That's one of the myths, help me get out of grief, right? We live with grief. We integrate grief in our life.
Do you ever not have grief in your life?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Actually, when
But
you think
levels.
about it, like there's grief just going from grade to grade in school. We leave one group of friends, one teacher, move to another, right? I think it's very common that loss is part of our life.
Yeah.
Loss is part of our life.
Loss.
Loss is part of our life, like joy is. It's very human. And that's a really one of the foundations. I like to share with people, grief is not a medical disorder. It's not a mental health diagnosis. It's very human. It's part of all of our lives. And it doesn't take a specialist. I'm not a doctor, it's just part of all of our lives. And we find supports in many places. Our friends, our family, our book clubs, our places of worship. There are people can support, as well as I'm here as well.
Right.
Right. And so you asked me about my role in particular. Right. As the bereavement coordinator, I work with our patients' families and loved ones for 13 months after the death of the patient. So I'm here as support for the families that continues for 13 months. And I'm really so proud of that I get to be connected with this, because what community institution follows up? And we send cards. We have 4 cards over that 13 months. We have condolence calls. We have check-in calls for everybody that we're here. And if they want to set up an appointment, we have individual grief support. We have family debriefing sessions, and we have grief support groups. All of those are available. And they're available to the whole community, not just our families. So anybody who would like grief support, or even just like a consultant, if you will, to talk because they know someone who's having a hard time and want to talk through it a little bit, they can always call. That's what we're here for. There's myself, and I have a colleague who works half-time with the bereavement services that we provide.
Oh, wow.
You know, we're here. And we do memorial services, too.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and finding, especially as more and more people move away from traditional places of worship, one of the pieces that's lacking is end-of-life support, funerals, right? Having a community available, right? This is, right? And then they find, well, what do we do? And they're making it up on their own. They're trying to figure out, so we can support them, both of creating their own celebration of life memorial services, as well as having ours that people are welcome to come to. Yeah.
You know, you deal with grief all day long. Does that?
Yes.
Do you feel their grief?
Oh my gosh.
You get emotionally attached to these families? You
Yes.
must.
That's the learning of doing this job, right? Learning that their grief is not my grief. Though my empathy, I feel with them, and that's the learning of doing this work, is really going into hospital rooms, again, at Bay State, the training program for the interfaith hospital chaplaincy, the spiritual care program. I remember the first time that a patient died, and I was with the family, and the tears, and it was just like I was drowning.
Yeah.
You know, I was being with them, and then
I can imagine.
And then the educator there, the manager of the spiritual care program, Reverend Ute Schmidt, just how important it was that she just sat with me to listen what I just experienced, just validating my feelings, normalizing it, how hard it is, and realizing that we can support each other as we go through the most overwhelming of times. That's where I kind of learned I could do that. I could listen to stories. I could be with people who are fully overwhelmed, you know, like underwater or in quicksand, going through mud, you know, as they describe it.
Yeah.
And I can be a support. I can accompany them, and remembering that they have other supports in their life too. I'm not the only person for them. One image that I learned was people are on the river of life in their boat, and then I come up alongside them in my boat, and I accompany them. I'm not carrying them. They're not leaning on my shoulder, you know, limping. They're in their boat. I'm in my boat. And I love that image because it's a little more spaciousness. And I actively provide support. And then at some point they go on their way and I go on my way.
That is a great analogy because I can imagine that the amount of time that you're spending with them, you get to know them, you almost become a member of their family, so to speak. But you have to be able to separate yourself in order for your life to continue on, and you've got many other lives that you have to care for. But I like this analogy of a boat. They're in their boat, I'm in my boat, we're together on the river.
Yes.
Or the stream of life, the
right.
river of life, as you refer to it.
That's right.
But there comes a point where I need to go my way, you need to go your way, but I'm always here for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's I love that.
And for me, it's very moving work, and it's very intimate because we are part of people's families, and we hear the stories of the good, bad, and the ugly all rolled together.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm sure you hear it all. Are there physical effects on the body from grief? Does grief cause a manifestation of physical effects?
So yes, and not physical alone. And I want to preface this by saying grief, it's not a medical disorder, right? And so it's not only about the physical effects. But yes, they're definitely, loss of appetite, soreness can come for sure. There's also kind of mental impacts where you're just thinking about that person all the time, maybe seeing them, at times, or hearing them, kind of the physical, mental. There's behaviors of just lack of eating, or sleeping
you see
all
that
the
a
time.
lot, right?
Right. So all these things are impacts and of grief. Yes, for sure. And what I like to say is everyone grieves, some longer than others. And that's, one of the big changes in how we understand grief. What became popularized was there are steps to grief, kind of work through grief, the 5 steps, which was brought in by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book on death and dying back in 1969, and it was amazing. Big bestseller, and it really reminded us that death is part of all of our lives. She was a scientist, a psychiatrist who was talking to people who were dying. And she just wanted to categorize what she was learning. She never said, these are steps to go through. It's not an exercise program that we're going to work through it and I'll be done with grief, get to acceptance, right? People have that notion, but it's unique for everybody. So it's not the same for anybody. And what this scholars who study grief, they've shown is that certainly if it's a grandparent, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a child, a friend, a beloved pet, each one of those is unique in its own right, wouldn't be the same experience. But then even within that, every relationship is unique. From kindness, compassion, loving, to indifference, to anxious, mean and cruel, and everything in between. And because every relationship is unique, every grief journey is unique. So there's no template out there for grief.
Wow. Every grief journey is unique. I like that.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that. When I was putting this interview together, and I was kind of thinking of it, I was spending some time online because I said, geez, I need to educate myself about grief because I really don't know anything other than I feel grief, but I'm not sure I could talk about it.
Right.
But one of the words that I kept coming across as I was looking into the word grief is depression. Is grief and depression the same thing? Are they different? Is depression caused by grief? How do those two kind of tie in together? And I'm guessing that's a difficult.
Yes, my first response is, I don't know. It's beyond my expertise.
Okay.
So this is a piece of difference between a grief counselor and a grief therapist. Right? A grief therapist trained in medications and mental health diagnoses. Depression is a mental health diagnosis. Okay? As a grief counselor, I'm here as a support. I'm listening. I'm helping, first of all, just normalize the experiences. Right? The people who call, it's been 3 weeks, and I find I'm still crying. What's wrong with me? It's like, no, you're grieving. Our services last for 13 months. And still in our grief support groups, it's been 2 years. And they're just finally wanting to sit with their grief, and bring attention to it. So so want to make that separation, grief counseling versus grief therapy.
Yeah,
so depression
that's
is
a great
diagnosis.
distinction, right?
Yeah,
Right.
And as a specialist, I would explore what it looks like, right? Because it's such an ambiguous word, depression. What does that look like for you? And start there. And what's in response to the death of a loved one? What was there beforehand? Right? People's anxieties, lethargy, like even beforehand, can get accentuated. But it doesn't mean it's all grief, because we have our temperaments and who we are, our unique characters that are there before grief too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So am I right to assume that when you're working with a patient, there's a certain point that you can take them, but if you recognize that they're in need of further help or deeper level of counseling, that you would turn them over to a therapist? How do you and a therapist, as a counselor and a therapist, how do those two tie in? And are you referencing or referring them on, or how do you know when you need a therapist versus a counselor?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I don't see grief counseling as therapy light. So it's not like taking them to like the first part and then like some second part. Don't
Okay.
assume that at all. Some people want to explore their relationship with their parent from childhood.
Oh, okay.
And why have I always develop insight? That's a larger project versus the response to grief.
Okay.
And being able to own that, name that, be with that, not go to war with our grief response. That's what's I find very common. People go to war in a way. There's a lot of rules where we judge it. Happiness, that's fine. We can giggle, no problem. But if tears come, or the feelings of grief so easily, we might feel ashamed of that, or just have rules where that's not okay. Some feelings are okay, some feelings are not okay, are rules that we develop. So how to open that up to say our feelings are our teachers, telling us something really important. Our sadness comes that we're missing something is gone now, that's really meaningful to us, that we really loved. Our anger comes, there's an injustice that's happened here. Our contempt comes when there's a boundary being crossed, that this is not right. Like there's information there. And then how do we respond?
Okay.
Right? So how do we see it like a guest and not that it's part of our life, but doesn't define us?
That's good. You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to just go into a little bit
Sure.
deeper. How has our understanding of grief changed?
Yeah. So a couple areas. One is, Bay State Health has been working with families, been 110 years. I just learned earlier this week.
Oh, wow.
In 1914, and there's been a Visiting Nurses Association going into people's homes, supporting
Wow.
them, And what happened in mid-century was the kind of creation of all of our hospitals and our community hospitals. And that provided so much in our communities. But one thing that shifted was people stopped dying at home.
Oh, I see.
That was the
Right.
beginning of dying in the hospital. And all of a sudden, end of life was removed from us as a culture.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? And so then that people forgot in a way that one, death happens to all of us. And hospitals are so associated with getting better, it became a failure almost. But death is the great mystery that is beyond all of our control, right? It's not within our control. That's why hospice provides comfort and dignity at end of life, right? How we reprioritize and how we spend our time, So that's a big change, right? And that's, believe it or not, there's actually a stigma around misunderstandings of hospice and comfort care and what that represents for people. So again, thank you for just opening this up to be able to talk about
Right,
it, right? And
right.
and demystify it.
Yeah.
So that's one big difference. So now we understand and we're relearning
Right.
that grief is a normal part, death is a normal part of all of our lives. And we all know people who've died, and we all have responses to that, And we can live with grief. We can integrate grief. We don't have to, remove it from our life or deny it from our life.
Yeah.
That's one big shift. Another big shift is just the role of science of how we understand our emotions. Like I was saying, the sense of emotions as teachers in our culture. So in the Middle Ages, what are our emotions anyways? In the Middle Ages, maybe it's where the planets are or the stars, The word Saturnine for depressed comes from Saturn. Jovial is from Jove, which is a word for Jupiter, for happy. So if you're happy, you're visited by the planets, right? Maybe you're Mercurial,
Right.
Venus, the goddess of love, right? Right. So, or always, even since the ancient world, emotions get second tier to our reason and our ideas. There's a culture, I like to say, we're much more Spock and Data, if you know what I mean, like from Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Of the like, kind of rational ideas, give me the facts, and we ignore our feelings. And I'd say to our own peril. So this work is very much remembering and reminding people we're a mind body, which is what modern science shows us, but it's one of those things that we still have this big split. There's our mind over here, there's our body and our feelings, but we're a mind, but they work together. All our nervous system is finely attuned to understand what's happening around us. To tell us, are we safe? Always, like every 4 seconds, scientists say. And we know this, like if we're in New York City, in a crowded sidewalk, we just kind of know how far people are. It's like, it's built into us. Right? Here we can be safe, and yet all those feelings, we interpret bodily sensations. How do we know we're feeling sad? How do we know? It happens so fast, but it's actually sensations. A tight jaw, tight eyes, one way you can experiment with it, just like in 30 seconds, is just like imagining you're driving on the road and someone comes up and starts tailgating you and honking their horn, and they come in and come up really close and they're honking, and you turn like, you want to say, back off, buddy, right? But if you just stop right there and just look at where your eyes, what does it feel like in your jaw, your shoulders, chest, and belly, right? You can feel like, well, for me, I have like tense eyes, a jaw, and I'm ready, ready to fight, right? Ready to yell at them. And the difference of, let's say, just welcoming a new puppy, is wiggling, so excited to see you. You're sitting on the ground, comes in your lap, it's wiggling its body, wants to lick you, you're hugging it, right? And you just stop right there. How does that feel? You can feel the openness, like in your eyes, your jaw, shoulders, chest, belly. It's like there's a sensation that comes. And they're different. They change. And so we're interpreting that. To what does it feel like? It's love, happiness, anger, sadness. So then we can begin to fine-tune. So while I say that grief is definitely not an exercise program like at the Y, like our grief support group, it's not 6 weeks and you'll be cured of grief. That's not what's happening, right? But we can learn. We can learn to bring attention to what does grief feel like in us.
Right.
And then become aware of it, give it attention, but we can also learn to move our attention away from our grief too. We're not only at its mercy and only as a victim. It's most intense early on, for sure, but it changes. It's not the same. Even during a day, grief changes. Maybe it's the morning that you're overwhelmed when you're not with your loved one. Maybe it's the evening. But then for most people, they do other things. They go to work, their family members, their parents, their neighbors, whatever, all these other parts. Right. So that's what I mean when grief is part of our life, but not all of our life.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes I wanted to come back, because you did mention about a grief therapist. When I would say another piece, there is a very, very small percentage of people that are truly so overwhelmed they can't get out of bed.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they're just, and their life stops because they're so bereaved, because they were so bonded with their loved one. They love them so much they can't imagine their world yet, right? So then we would refer to like a crisis line, that there is support and listeners that can be there even in the middle of the night for them, and having that. So that's a piece. You do provide that too, and assess for that.
Actually, you've really already been talking about this, but different levels of the intensity of grief. Grief is not just the same for everyone. There's different levels. Yeah. Is there a form that's of grief or a cause of grief that's worse than others? Is Is it due to, loss of a child or a life partner, due to a suicide, a homicide, or it could be a number of other things as well. Those are pretty extreme examples, but does grief have a relationship to the experiences that are triggering that?
Yeah. Yes, it does. And I would say more than the type of relationship, child or parent. It's the what happens at time of death. So suddenness at time of death intensifies grief. So, a car accident, right, where someone tragically dies. It's so shocking, because death is always a shock, right? But that's the most severe. Instantly, what? It's hard to even comprehend, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
That's one piece,
right.
And the other piece is suffering at end of life, seeing a loved one suffering.
Okay.
That also just sears us in a way that intensifies our grief. And both of those are actually supported by hospice, because hospice helps people acknowledge that death is coming. This is the end of life. This is the last chapter of living. And everyone kind of steps into getting used to that, if you will. That grief begins. Often it begins with the first diagnosis in someone's trajectory, right? It's not only after the death. And this grief, it's like in our first information session, when we set up, hospice provides bed and all the equipment, and as someone's room transforms. These are all major recognitions that helps people, because they're with a community of people that reminds them that we can get through this, and we're look what we're providing, like the comfort for the patient. And the suffering as well. Hospice addresses the suffering through our comfort care measures. And not only that, by being able to model and teach the caregivers that it's all right to hold their hand, to wipe their brow, just to sit with them. Because people can often be scared.
Yeah.
And it's not know how much, what can they do? And so that modeling, that supports their grief journey, right? Because it's just coming to peace with it, coming to peace with what is happening here, it's a journey, coming to acceptance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why is, and again, we've kind of touched on a lot of this, but grief is certainly more pronounced during the holidays.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is it the first anniversary? Is it the missing of thinking about family or loved ones?
I would say it's more having these rituals and holidays and meals that have often been done with our loved one, and now they're no longer here. And that's why it's not only within the first year, but even 10 years later, 20 years later. And it's not just the holidays either. Really, it's how birthdays have that, anniversary dates. Could other things like high school graduations. I wish my loved one was here with me to see this moment, right?
Yeah.
These are all moments that bring our loved one to mind.
Right.
Right? And in the first year in particular is often the most intense of that, because it's all new. Again, like hospice, they could have done 6 months. They could have done a year, right? But they did 13 months of support, bereavement support. And I love that, because it reminds us that the first year is all a year of firsts. The whole year is a year of firsts. So many new things, especially if they took care of, if it's a couple, they took care of home repair. Now that's on you. They took care of the finances. Now that just complicates, it's anxiety producing. It's for people have to reorient and learn. And they learn all these little things they never even thought of. Oh my God, they used to take care of that, and now here it is, right? So they're with them, many reminders. Holidays, all the more so, because there's this updraft of joy. Everyone, Thanksgiving, the end of year holidays, people just want so much, right, to celebrate. And that's where other people might not, be as sensitive. They think it's good for you, right? And they don't realize how much we're hurting and we're grieving. And so what we recommend to everybody is to go at your own pace. You don't have to do it the same way. People try. Oh my gosh, I get calls. Someone just last week was sharing, last year I just thought I could just do it like every year. And then for her, she was wrapping presents. And then just broke it down into tears and said, I can't do this, right? It's different. So you're recreating new rituals.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, based on what you've just said, that there's no ignoring grief during the holidays. It's going to manifest itself.
Yeah.
Memories are going to pop up.
Yeah.
Experiences, smells, sights, sounds, all of those can trigger memories, and that will, in its own realm, create grief.
Yes. And so then the question is, what do we do, right? Like, how could we respond? Mm-hmm. May I share a poem?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is called The Elephant in the Room by Terry Kettering.
Okay.
Just about this.
I like that.
There's an elephant in the room. It's large and squatting. It's so hard to get around it. Yet we squeeze by with, "How are you? I'm fine," and 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about the weather. We talk about work. We talk about everything else except the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room. We all know it's there. We're thinking about the elephant as we talk together. It's constantly on our minds. For you see, it's a very large elephant that has hurt us all. But we don't talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please, can we just say her name? Can we just say Barbara again? Please, let's talk about the elephant in the room. For if we talk about her death, perhaps we can talk about her life. Can I say Barbara to you and not have you look away? For if I cannot, then you're just leaving me alone in a room with an elephant.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
For me, it's the reminder that the not talking about the person is what causes so much pain. Being alone, it compounds isolation.
Right.
And so we recommend having pictures out, right? Cooking a favorite food, right? Lighting a candle, sharing stories. What would they be doing? Like that we can talk about as part of our celebration. We can remember too. We can have remembrance and incorporate that. Some have a chair at the table. Even some there's no rules to it. But it's about how do we acknowledge this person who we're all thinking of, that it's all right to talk about them, because everyone is feeling that if in a family, and also for people to have permission to just leave early, right? You don't have to go for the whole thing. Leave early. Maybe you don't host. Maybe what do you want to cook? Plan it out. Maybe other people are cooking this year if you're normally the cook, Permission to not go at all. Permission to have, pizza and Netflix for Thanksgiving, Just do something.
You know what? That's not a bad idea.
Right? You can do that too, and that's all right. If it goes pizza and Netflix until mid-January, then maybe, it's a bit too much, right? But we have permission for those things. How do we allow ourselves? It doesn't have to be the same. What do we want to do? Maybe we don't have to put up all the lights that we do every year, right? The same way. And go easy on ourselves. It's a time, just like with our grief support groups, we have one of our, it's a place of kindness and compassion, not only for each other, but for ourselves. As we go through something that there's no preparation for and just tremendously overwhelming. Potentially a shattering and a rupture of our lifetime. No small thing.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So we have an understanding. It's part of our lives. We know that it's going to exhibit itself. So what can we do to support a friend or a loved one who is grieving? What can we do as individuals? We're not trained, but what can we do as friends, as family, as caring individuals? What can we do to help them through what they're suffering?
Thank you for asking that. That's so important, because we can all support our loved ones who are grieving, and and it's just by being there. Really, it's like there's the phrase, "Don't just do something, sit there." That's the practice of listening, to our experiences of grief, and not filling it in. So often, people want to help people feel better. Maybe they'll turn into a theologian and say, "Oh, it's what God wanted," or without any idea of how that lands with someone else, not having any idea of what the other person's religious or spiritual life is like. They're not a clergy person, like that's, and even if it's a 99-year-old beloved grandmother, I still wish they were here with us. It doesn't make it better, right? There's no at least. That's another thing. People can say, at least there's this, at least there's this. Or guilt, like they brought it on themselves. All these things are what people share with folks that can be very hurtful, not helpful.
Yeah.
What's helpful is just being present, How's it going today? And listening, to letting them know that you're available. To letting say that I'm up early if you want to call in the morning, or late, and sometimes they're offering for groceries, or bringing the casserole.
Right.
Even that, sometimes it's bringing the casserole at the handoff that all of a sudden a lot of stories and feelings come forward, That it's about timing as well. And it's on their timing, not on our timing.
Right.
And I also counsel the bereaved to not take it personally. When someone can only say, "Come out Saturday night, it'll be good for you. We'll go dancing." Very common. And yet, no, I don't want to go dancing.
Yeah.
No, that's not where I'm at, right? And I remind them it's really about them, not about you,
Right.
Aren't you over it yet? So these are the negative things. Aren't you over it yet? It's been 3 months. It's been 6 months. Whatever. It's been 9 months. Aren't you over it yet? Like that? No, it comes and goes. It's part of our life. And so if we can be a listener for folks, that's a great support right there. That's a world of difference.
I was just sitting here thinking about the fact that we're talking about how can we help others through their grieving. How do we help ourselves?
Yeah.
How do we help ourselves when we recognize we are grieving?
Yes. In the same way, How do we not judge it, not try and fix, say it's not okay? That's where we get into problems. That's just so common in our whole culture. We're highly effective people. We want the 7 habits for highly effective people. That's why I think the 5 steps turned into, I'm going to work the 5 steps, and then I'll be through with my grieving. It comes. And how do we give ourselves time? And to say we're going to take 15 minutes in the evening and the weekend when you have space to remember your loved one, to understand what the grief is. How is it showing up in your body? To journal, to say simple prompts, I loved it when, I'm sorry that. I wish we could, thank you for, and just write, by remembering them, spending time with them. And just, 20 minutes, whatever's natural, 30 minutes, an hour, 10 minutes even, just remembering them to say that's part of our life, but not all of our life. Because the avoidance is what can complicate our grief, actually. It's so much of it. And it's not the whole story, but there's just a lot of avoidance and bringing that kindness to ourselves.
Right.
Non-judgmental, being with what's present.
Right.
Those are things to practice, because it's not easy. Not easy.
Yeah, no, you're right. You shared a term with me when we were first corresponding with each other, putting this together. Can grief get stuck?
Mm.
And that totally took me by surprise. I said, I don't know what that is. I've been looking, as I was looking at a lot of the questions you were sending it to me, I'm looking those up and I'm doing my research on the internet and stuff. And then I'm saying, what is that?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I used the term stuck?
Yeah.
That was my term.
Yeah,
so I would say,
if it's
a foundation is
Okay.
that our feelings flow. Our grief flows.
Okay.
Life, we're always responding to what happens in the moment.
Right.
And every moment, every day brings new situations, and we respond. We can just watch a movie, and we know our feelings change, right?
Right.
Throughout it, we're responding.
Right.
That's this back and that's about, and it flows through us. And the sense of stuckness can be when we don't allow or accept or we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
And then we can get stuck. That's how I would describe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surviving the holidays while grieving.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because there's one of the myths of grief is that just time heals everything.
Yeah, right.
Right?
We
And
hear that
it's
all the time.
Not necessarily true, especially if there is guilt or anger or resentment. Some feelings can fester, and we try and avoid it, but it can fester. And what I remind people is we can repair relationships even after death. We can repair relationships. We can say, I'm sorry. It's so natural to think about all the things we could have done. We wish we had done.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? It's so natural.
Right.
And yet people, how to not just ignore that or continue to beat ourselves up for it. We can actually apologize. We can actually name it. We can remember the things that we did do also, right? Our minds can go to what we didn't do instead of all that we did do, And so how do we just take a step back, enlarge our perspective?
Having that conversation with somebody who's passed away, who's now, they're in a cemetery and you visit the gravesite.
Yeah.
Having a conversation with them and sharing thoughts or apologizing to your point or
Yes.
Is that okay?
Thank you for saying that. That's beautiful. And that's a change in grief counseling, actually. They used to talk about moving on, form new relationships, get over it. Actually, grief counselors would say that up until the mid-90s, believe it or not. And when I was learning about this, I realized what I learned, it actually came from the 1800s. And it was an impact, believe it or not, of seances. Okay? So the brief story is that seances developed as a way in Protestantism, also called spiritualism, as a way of contacting ancestors. In Asian countries, ancestor worship, very common, of having food and offering incense, just sharing first day of school and share it with the ancestors, like part of their life. In Protestantism, this grew in the mid-1800s. And the clergy who specialized in that were called mediums.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, so maybe we heard that term, right?
Yep.
After the Civil War. So now we're up in the 1860s, mid-1860s, 1870s. People wanted to connect with their loved ones who died in the war. And when the demand rose, also the cons rose.
Oh, yeah,
if you give me a couple dollars,
Yeah.
I'll connect you with your loved one, and all this, that
Right.
kind of what I grew up with, the hokiness,
Right.
And then people were conned, and it wasn't meaningful. Then the Ouija board was part of that system. They marketed it as a game. Did not help taking serious what that work was.
Right.
And so then in the 1900s, it was all considered a hoax and a sham. And so psychology, reacting to those things, said, oh, no, don't connect with any, it's all a hoax.
Mm.
Move on.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the 1980s they realized, no, actually, they're part of our life until we die, in our memories, in
Yeah.
our stories.
Right.
They're alive within us.
Right.
There's no doubting that. Religions have known that, not just the seance, but there are prayers for those, are memorial services, right? Ancestor rituals, like Day of the Dead. Like, there's lots of ways that, in a serious way, people have known, cultures have known, that yes, it's still there's still the relationship. And I love that you asked that, because a lot of people ask me, am I crazy to do that?
Right.
So I said, no, not at all. It's a natural outgrowth that they're there. And there are many stories in the Middle Ages, kind of looking at many stories where it's called intercessionary prayer, where you can ask for those who have died to intercede to help us in our life, and we can help them as well as they travel up wherever they're traveling through, but that there was communication through death, through the veil of death. So that it's not, what I say is, we're science-based, we're not seance-based at hospice, but we have continuing relationships, for sure. And we can talk with them. They're in our hearts. We can. What's the legacy they give us? To really think about that. We can create a memory box just with photos, pictures, magazine pictures that remind you of their strengths.
Sure.
Put some of their special items in it, and keep that, and then have that to share stories with the younger generation who've never met them, or very young, who will be asking about them. Who was Grandpa?
Right.
Anyways,
Right.
And so we can definitely cultivate that, and through rituals and expressive arts, again, just through simple things like a memory box, writing, things like that. Yes.
These are great tips. If people, is your office and your program available to anybody who feels that they need grief counseling?
Yes.
People can call you.
Best kept secret.
You're the best kept secret.
Yes.
So if people
we are
need help,
available.
you're right there, because I love
Yes.
everything I'm listening to.
Yes.
And if you had to create a 1, 2, 3 checklist for people to help get through the holidays, how to manage their grief, how to handle their grief, to recognize that grief is okay,
Yeah.
what would those quick little
Yeah.
steps be?
Listen to their inner voice of what they're telling them, how
Okay.
to have permission that it doesn't have to be the same,
Right.
and that they can craft it, they can do less, they can shift it, they can have their own car so they can drive home, they can not go as well, and let people know it's not you, and having permission to do that, and find ways to remember them, simple ways. Maybe it's you're creating a new gathering with other people to share stories about them. Maybe it's maybe that's afterwards. Maybe that's in January, and just know that there's no have-tos, and you have full permission to not do.
And it's okay to talk about them. Typically,
Yes.
we go through the funeral, we go through the service,
Yes.
and they're interred into the ground, and we forget them. Or it's not that we forget them, but we cease to talk about them.
Yes.
But
We
it's
can
okay.
talk about them.
It's okay to talk about them.
That's it
And
right
keep
there.
that part of our conversation,
Yes.
and keep those memories of who they were to us alive.
Yes. That's a beautiful capstone right there.
Right.
It's okay to talk about them. And through the holidays, all the more so.
Yeah.
Because it's that isolation and feeling like there's no one who can
Right.
talk about them,
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's one of the powers of the grief support groups. People who can listen, who understand,
Right.
right? It's a place where it's not a fixing zone. It's just the listening about what's our experience
Yeah. Right.
and hear from others. Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground here. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I have to tell you that it has conjured up a lot of thoughts and memories and some emotion inside of me as I've been listening to you, because I'm thinking about some special people in my life
Yeah.
who are no longer with me. But this has really, really been good. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to share quickly? We're getting close on time here, but is there any other points of interest that we haven't covered that you feel pertinent, or do you think we've got enough to give people to?
I think this is a good beginning, you know. Really would share that our Susanna is tasked with community programs. So not only can people call for individual grief support and to join our grief support groups, but we also offer community programs.
Right, okay.
Either one time or series of programs about grief, of projects that are available for any organization to senior centers, libraries, businesses, for their staff coming in, if they're like just all of those, we're here. I would say that.
And how do people get in touch with your office? Is there a phone number or?
Yes. My number directly is 413-798-5167.
So again, go ahead.
Yeah, and so that can be able to come directly to me as the grief counselor and educator.
So again, David Arfa, who is the coordinator for bereavement services for Bay State Hospice in West Springfield, his number is 413-798-5167. And this has been a fascinating conversation and certainly a topic that affects all of us. And as I was sitting here, it certainly conjured up, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my own thoughts and emotions and memories of people that I have lost in my life who have been very close to me. But I think as I picked up a few talking points from this, every grief journey is unique, and it's okay to grieve. Understanding the grief journey is important. Grief is not a medical disorder or a mental disorder. It's something that we feel. And loss is part of our life, just as joy is. And so look at the grieving process and using someone like David to help you through this as the river of life. And you're in your boat, he's in his boat. He's there to help you, and when you feel that everything is okay, you're going to go your way, he's going to go his way. But I think what's important is to know that there are people out there, whether it's David or not, there are people and there are services that can help you get through this. But recognize that the holidays do bring these feelings and memories of grief, but it's okay. You've got people around you, and you've got services within which to help you. So with that being said, David Arfa, I want to say thank you again for coming in. Absolutely fascinating conversation. Really, really enjoyed it. I want to say special thanks to Pete Coles, our WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15 manager and producer, for his help to make this show possible. Don't forget that this show does air every Tuesday and Thursday through the month at 2:45. So if you want to watch it again, you can. And it's also saved to YouTube through our community access channel. So on behalf of Pete Coles, Mike Squindo, and Tina Gorman, I'm Harry Rock, and this has been another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents on WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show. Thanks again.